All right, let's get into it. Okay, Jesse, I have to start. Well, I'm always going to use your questions, but I have to start with your discomfort with Sam at Frodo's feet. And I know we're going back a chapter. That's why I'm starting with it. And I'm not picking on you. And I'll I'll explain what I mean. So Jessie, quite fairly, has expressed that she's uncomfortable with the way Sam is described lying at Frodo's feet or curled up at Frodo's feet in at Woodhall with Gildor and the elves. And I have no problem with that. Like, anyone can be uncomfortable with whatever element they want. And I don't think Jesse's been insisting on it being anything sinister or anything. But I've always been really resistant to that. And I've mentally have always pushed back. I've always wanted to say, no, that's not how it is. That he's not being dehumanized there. He's not being treated like a dog. And mentally, I just kept going there, right? And I I didn't really have a coherent rationale why. And so I went back and reread it because I want to understand my thinking there. And my first thought was, no, there's a head of a table and a foot of a table, and for Sam may well have been curled up near his head if they're lying down, or near his feet, and that's just all the expression means. And I don't think that's correct. I had to ultimately give that one up. I mean, he is. I think Frodo is probably sitting here. We're not told exactly, but it would make sense. And Sam definitely curls up at his feet, like a dog. The comparison is rational. So then I had to give that up, and I thought, okay, why does that not make me uncomfortable? That Sam is being treated that way or being described that way. Why am I not offended by that? And I thought, well, that's obviously not how Tolkien means for us to take that. He's describing something very fairly normal, a master-servant relationship in sort of a pre-industrial context like this in the Shire is obviously not something he would consider to be offensive or that we should take to be offensive. And I think that's true too. But that wasn't why it was bothering me. And the reason I figured out why it bothered me so much that I should feel like I should take offense on Sam's behalf is that Sam would hate that. If I tried to tell Sam that I was offended that he curled up at Frodo's feet, or that I felt like he was being treated poorly or unfairly by that, I don't know if he'd be livid, but he'd be. I think he'd be offended at my taking offense at that. He clearly values his and takes pride in his job. He's Mr. Frodo's gardener, and he's gone along to his cover is that he's gone along to Crick Hollow, that's what it is, to do for Mr. Frodo, basically be his manservant, and he obviously takes immense pride in his position and in his relationship with Frodo, and I don't think that's some sort of Stockholm syndrome where he's come to love Frodo and love his job because of how poorly he's treated. I think that he is proud of what he does and of the trust that Mr. Frodo places in him and in his responsibility for caring for him. And I think that's why when I picture Sam curled up at Frodo's feet, obviously we learn in A Conspiracy Unmasked that he's doing that for a reason, and that's to listen in. And I just, again, coming back to you, Jesse, and this is why I insist I'm not picking on you for this. I think it's perfectly rational to be bothered by it, but I'm explaining why I'm not. And I think it's because if I expressed that to Sam, he would be appalled. And the other thing I wanted to point out in going back and rereading that, and I want to I want to read that one paragraph, and I always skip over the first section, but coming back to it after a conspiracy unmasked, it really caught me. After a while, Pippin fell fast asleep and was lifted up and borne away to a bower under the trees. There he was laid upon a soft bed and slept the rest of the night away. Sam refused to leave his master. When Pippin had gone, he came and sat curled up at Frodo's feet, where at last he nodded and closed his eyes. Frodo remained long awake, talking with Gildor. Okay, two things. Pippin fell fast asleep. Sam nodded and closed his eyes. We read through that, or I read through that, and Sam fell asleep. No, Sam nodded and closed his eyes. The narrator tells us that he's lying, that he's acting asleep, if we have eyes to read it. There's no reason on the first read to read it that way, but coming back to it, it's interesting. And the other thing, what did the elves do when Pippin fell asleep? They picked him up and put him to bed. What did the elves do when Sam nodded and closed his eyes? Nothing at all. They know he's acting. And I just looked down and I was like, oh, Sam, that's so good. The elves knew. The elves had to know. They would have picked him up and put him to bed if he had been asleep. They knew he was acting. The only one he fooled was Frodo. And I just love that. That was so good. Anyway, so Jesse, thank you for making me go back and look at that. Just catching up on the chat here. Yeah, Jesse, I totally get you can't get the picture out of your mind once you think of it like Sam curled up like a dog. I totally get it. No fault of yours. It was an opportunity for me to go back and look at it closely, and I'm so glad that I did. Yeah. Okay, good. What was there something else that I wanted to touch on about that? No, I don't think so. All right, so Jesse had, what was it, 9 or 10 good questions this week, all of which I enjoyed, and I liked the responses. The one I want to focus on just for a minute here was question number 8 about the whether in the conspiracy unmasked whether the hobbits, the other hobbits, decided to go with Frodo out of loyalty or out of a sense of wanting to have an adventure. And I posted a bit about this. My thoughts on it are basically that it's both. They intended to go with him when they thought he was just going to go off and follow Mr. Bilbo, and they decided to stick with their plan even once they learned the much more dangerous truth because of their loyalty. But I want to expand on that a little bit and go further on something that I alluded to in the chat, which is I don't think that, well, we know that the hobbits can't imagine, none of the hobbits, including Frodo, can imagine what they're in for in terms of danger and terror. They understand that there's danger, but even having been sort of chased by Black Riders, I really think that if Frodo and Sam have some idea of what's going on and the danger and, have some real grasp of what they're in for, I don't think that Pippin and maybe Merry do. Certainly not Pippin. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. It's his line after they sing their song, their adapted dwarf setting out song, once Frodo relents and agrees that they can go with him, and they sing their song, and it concludes, or one of the last lines is, "We ride before the break of day." And Frodo says, "Okay, well, yes, we'll do that. And that being so, let's, we'd better go to bed. We have a lot to do. We have a lot to prepare before we can get off." And I'm not sure if it's before or after Merry says, "We can go whenever you want." But Pippin says, "Oh, that was poetry. That our song about we ride before the break of day. I didn't actually, clearly he didn't actually mean that. That's just sort of adapting what the dwarf said." And I think that it's kind of a throwaway line, and it's kind of, in the context of the Peter Jackson sort of lazy, fat, well-fed hobbitry, we can sort of read that as just like, oh, Pippin's slothful, doesn't like getting up early. And I think he is, because I think we see Merry say, even Pippin is awake the next morning. But I think it indicates that they're not, Merry says, "We are horribly afraid." Nothing in their behavior here or in the next couple of chapters indicates that they're anywhere near, to borrow the Jackson line that he put in Aragorn's mouth, "Are you frightened? Not nearly frightened enough," right? I don't think they're nearly frightened enough. And in fairness, how could they be? They don't know what's in store for them. But I just wanted to make that point that, Merry says, "We are horribly afraid." No, I don't think you are yet. Okay, so those are the preamble things that I wanted to talk about, and those were both fun to go back and look at, because I dug up more stuff that I had not read by reading closely, and so I want to do that some more. I posted a couple of options for the close reading. There were two clear favorites. One of them was obviously the conspiracy being unmasked, and what was the other one? Oh yeah, Sam and the elves, and how sort of Sam. Well, we'll go back to it, but the way that Sam felt changed after his dinner his evening meal with the elves at Woodhall. Okay, my notes. I'm just gonna catch up on the chat before we get into that. Yeah, Paige, that's a fair point. Their excitement for leaving could be masking their fear at this point. That's possible. Let's look at that. They're definitely excited. Oh, Jesse, that's a great point. They're more afraid than they've ever been, but that's still not enough. Exactly. Yeah. And Jenny, yeah, exactly. I don't blame them for not being afraid. They have no idea what to expect, but I don't know if they are. Okay. So let's unmask a conspiracy here. So I'm sort of looking at page 136 onward is sort of the core of it. Sorry, 134 is where it starts, where Pippin whispers to Merry, "It's coming out in a minute." I always wonder if Frodo heard that line, or it seems like I'm picturing him just lost in thought, because I can't imagine 5 hobbits sitting around a table and one of them leaning over and whispering to another while everyone is in silence and Frodo not hearing. But it's clear he doesn't from the next line. Okay, so there are 3 kind of segments to what is revealed when the conspiracy is unmasked. 1, we know that you're leaving, and we know basically why. 2, we're coming with you. And 3, Sam's been our chief informant, gathering intel. And those all make a big impression individually on Frodo, and we see that. So I want to look at those. So it begins with Frodo. He's struggling with explaining what to what to say about their time on the road, which Pippin ultimately tells. Frodo doesn't want to say that he's leaving. Merry ends up saying that for him. And he's also very defensive, you can see, about Farmer Maggot's guess. Let's do a read here. The one thing that I want to note that it was new to me was Merry talking about the ring. Of course we understand, said Merry firmly. That is why we've decided to come. We know the ring is no laughing matter, but we are going to do our best to help you against the enemy. The ring, said Frodo, now completely amazed. Yes, the ring, said Merry. My dear old hobbit, you don't allow for the inquisitiveness of friends. I have known about the existence of the ring for years, before Bilbo went away, in fact, but since he obviously regarded it as secret, I kept the knowledge in my head until we formed our conspiracy. He goes on to explain, at some length, why he knows about the ring and how he learned about it. And what struck me is that given what comes after this, his talk of them revealing Sam as their informant, is that this is immaterial. This is kind of a non sequitur because, well, not a non sequitur, but it's not important because the fact that he knew about the ring beforehand didn't in any way inform their decision or their conspiracy. The reason that they found out the ring is important is Sam, right? He's the reason why he heard a good deal about an enemy and a ring and the end of the world. I think that's the Jackson part. I get them conflated. But anyway, that is how they learn about the ring and its importance. If not for Sam, they would only have known it as Mr. Bilbo's invisibility ring, which may have been left to Frodo, may not have, who knows. But the fact that he knew about the ring beforehand, is there any reason why that's important? Can you guys see any reason why that's relevant at all to this unmasking of the conspiracy? Yeah, Jesse's just saying the same thing. It was just a ring that turns you invisible. And if not for Sam, that's all they would have known. So is Merry, what I'm getting at here is Merry building to something? Is he just sort of boasting? Like, finally, I can tell you all about the time that I saw Bilbo with the ring. Because to me, if he says, we know about the ring and we'll help you against the enemy, and Frodo says, the ring? How do you know about that? Well, the answer is Sam. We know about that because of Sam. We don't know about the ring and the enemy and all of this because I saw Bilbo escape from the Sackville Bagginses that one time. It just kind of, it makes me wonder, and I'd have to go back into the history of Middle-earth and see if there's anything in there in the earlier drafts, but Tolkien didn't discard a lot of his writing. I kind of wonder, I mean, Sam was a very late addition. Not very late, but he was not in the early drafts of The Lord of the Rings. Is it possible that this was the full answer beforehand and he just kept it in because he liked it? I wonder about that. Oh, Aiden's late, but here. Awesome. Paige, there are a lot of reveals in this chapter, and this is another reveal, and I think this is a reveal that Merry wanted to make rather than sort of, I mean, he does admit that he snuck around and spied. He admits that he got into Bilbo's book and read it. This feels more like a confession than sort of an explanation. Good thoughts, Essa. Maybe he wants to seem like he's in the know, that he's important so they don't leave him behind. I wonder if that's a motivation for Merry. Yeah. sort of showing, hey, look, I know a lot more than you think. You should bring me along. Because you're right, he's got to be worried. They've all got to be worried that Frodo won't bring them. We do know that they're that, yeah. Jesse, are you going to bat for Sam again? Maybe he didn't. Maybe he just didn't want to give Sam all the credit. You may be right. You may be right. He almost certainly did want to reserve some credit for himself. Well, Mary reveals that he knew about it before Sam found out, because he saw him put it on, or at least she saw a glint of gold, and then he understood it and read the book. Are the families intertwined? Not very. No. Christy, I think that's a good take. Could be that they have seen that there is a magic ring, which would have them open to more information with respect to the enemy and all the bad stuff coming. That's possible. Yeah, if they weren't open to magic, then maybe they wouldn't be open to everything else and could dismiss it more easily. I wonder. See, they've grown up on old Mr. Bilbo's tales, right? Which is why that's the only part that I'd quibble with. I don't think they would. I think they're open to magic even without knowing about the ring, because I think they've heard enough and believe Mr. Bilbo's tales. Yeah. Okay. Here's the other thing that I wanted to point out from this chapter. So, step forward, Sam, said Mary. And Sam stood up, with a face scarlet up to the ears. Here's our collector of information. And he caught a lot, I can tell you, before he was finally caught. So he collected a lot. After which, I may say, he seemed to regard himself as on parole and dried up. So Sam's been their informant up until he got caught. And then he considered himself on parole and dried up. But he clearly told Merry and Pippin all about what he heard that night when Gandalf was there, and Gandalf infenestrated him. Because how else would they know? He dried up after that, in that he didn't do any more spying, or just was brought into the confidences of Frodo and didn't reveal any of that. But Gandalf and Frodo told him not to say anything that night. Don't tell anyone, or else he'll be turned into a spotted toad and Gandalf will fill the garden with snakes, right? But he did. He told them all about the enemy and the ring, and he must have, right? That's the only way they could know. So he dried up after that, but he told them everything that night. And I want to go back to that night. I want to go back to, well, of course I'm going back to a pub scene, because I love the pub scenes. Going back to page 60, which is in the Shadow of the Past, which is after Ted, Sandyman, and Sam have their exchange at the pub. So Ted Sandyman has drained his glass and stepped out. Sam sat silent and said no more. He had a good deal to think about. For one thing, there was a lot to do up in the Bag End garden, and he would have a busy day tomorrow, if the weather cleared. The grass was growing fast, but Sam had more on his mind than gardening. After a while he sighed and got up and went out. Sam had more on his mind than gardening, did he? We had no reason to think of it at the time, but I think now we know what he had on his mind. He had a good deal to think about. For one thing, there was a lot to do up in the Bag End garden. That's for one thing. Okay, so he's thinking about things to do in the garden. Why is he thinking of things to do up at the Bag End garden? What's going to happen tomorrow morning? The grass was growing fast. Oh, is it growing fast perhaps under the window? With your you might need your clippers there, eh, Sam? He knows he's got spying to do tomorrow. That's what's on his mind, right? He knows. And why is he thinking about the elves and sailing, sailing, sailing? He's in a poetic mood because he knows something big is happening here and he's spying on it. He's got a task here. And he's thinking of, well, I think, how can I position myself in the Bag End Garden tomorrow if the weather clears, because I know Gandalf is there and they're going to be having close talks. How am I going to get more information? Well, the grass is growing fast. I'll get my clippers and I'll go under there. And he ends up getting caught, right? So it's just one of those funny things that at the time you think nothing of it. I don't. And then you come back to think, oh, okay, that's what he was thinking about. I always find that fun. Okay, what was the other thing there? Okay, yeah, going back to that same passage when Sam is revealed. Sam, cried Frodo, feeling that amazement could go no further, and quite unable to decide whether he felt angry, amused, relieved, or merely foolish. Yes, sir, said Sam, begging your pardon, sir. But I meant no wrong to you, Mr. Frodo, nor to Mr. Gandalf for that matter. He has some sense, mind you, and when you said go alone, he said, no, take someone as you can trust. Now, I always hurry along to, but it does not seem that I can trust anyone. But isn't this mighty bold of Sam? I mean, read between the lines here. What's he saying? It's in italic. He has some sense, mind you, as opposed to Mr. Sam? As opposed to Frodo, as opposed to Mr. Frodo. He's saying, you don't have any sense if you're going to go alone. Well, you're probably right, but I take that as rather bold from a gardener. Oh, I don't know. Maybe I find that funnier than I ought to, but I don't know that he would have been so bold in the normal course. And Sam, of course, I mean, he's scarlet. He's embarrassed. He's unhappy. He's clearly feels. I mean, Frodo feels angry, relieved, foolish. I mean, I think Sam's flustered, but I think he lets one slip here. Yeah, Christy, I think that's right. I think we're meant to think that Sam is thinking about the elves and the pub conversation. Not that he's a spy. Of course, we have no reason to think that he's spying at this point. But yeah, I think he's just thoughtful about the elves sailing, leaving us, sailing. Yeah. Just catching up. Yeah, Jenny, you're right. Hobbits do grow on gossip. It's unsurprising that Frodo should have allowed for the inquisitiveness of friends if he knows anything about hobbits. So Christy asks, could Merry and Pippin have threatened him? Like, not with violence, but more coerced him to talk. That's not the way I have always imagined they got information out of him. Because I can't imagine... Well, I guess it depends what you mean by threatened. They are his social betters. They may have suggested that he would be in trouble if he didn't talk to them. But I don't think that's it. I feel like Sam has enough opportunities in this book to demonstrate his loyalty. And I don't think that any threat of, you said not violence, but any threat of even violence or loss of job or anything else would convince Sam to give up a confidence like that. I mean, this is fairly deviant behavior for a servant to be spying on his master. I've always thought that they probably came to him and said, look, you know he's going to try to leave and take off after Mr. Bilbo. Do you want him to do that alone? Do you want your master to go half mad like Bilbo and fly off into the woods and get drowned in some lake or something like that? We want to help him. We want to go with him and have an adventure and look after him. And we'll take you with us if you help us to keep tabs on him. So I think that the only way he could be convinced to spy on them, Frodo and Gandalf, is out of love, out of wanting what's best for him. I mean, he says, I meant no wrong to you, Mr. Frodo, nor to Mr. Gandalf for that matter. I think we can take him at his word there, of course. I think that it was probably just impressed on him, look, if you don't do this, who knows? Like, even if you don't tell us, like, this is what I would have said as Merry and Pippin. Even if you don't tell us everything about what happens, if you're not looking out for signs that he's about to go, he's going to slip off without any of us. And I think that he probably trusted them, and that's how I read how he was brought into the conspiracy. Yeah. Okay. We do have some time still, so I will go back on to a quick read of Sam and the elves, but just catching up on this. Yeah, Parmalk, I agree. I mean, planning to go into something almost certainly dangerous does imply a very small amount of sense. Planning to go alone there, yes. I mean, I'm not saying Sam is wrong. I'm just surprised that he would say it so boldly. Yeah. Smash cut to the worst happening, that's right. What's the worst that could happen? What's the worst that could happen? And then you wake up in a barrow. Oh, spoilers. Okay. Let's bit back quickly, unless you have anything else on that, to page 113. Let me read some of this. I'll come back to some points that stuck out to me. While I'm reading, let me know if there's anything that jumped out at you. He looked at Sam Gamgee and discovered that Sam was watching him. Well, Sam, he said, what about it? I am leaving the Shire as soon as ever I can. In fact, I have made up my mind now not even to wait a day at Crick Hollow, if it can be helped. Very good, sir. You still mean to come with me? I do. It is going to be very dangerous, Sam. It is already dangerous. Most likely neither of us will come back. If you don't come back, sir, then I shan't, that's certain, said Sam. Don't you leave him, they said to me. Leave him, I said. I never meant to. I'm going with him, if he climbs to the moon. And if any of those black riders try to stop him, they'll have Sam Gamgee to reckon with, I said. They laughed. Who are they? And what are you talking about? The elves, sir. See, there it is again. Elves, sir. We had some talk last night, and they seemed to know you were going away, so I didn't see the use of denying it. Wonderful folk, elves, sir. Wonderful. Elves, sir, again. They are, said Frodo. Do you like them still, now that you've had a closer view? Okay, I want to pause there, because there are a couple things. They'll have, if any of those Black Riders try to stop him, they'll have Sam Gamgee to reckon with, I said. They laughed. How do you read they laughed? I've always sort of uncomfortably read it as they laughed derisively, or they, they recognized how silly that is. But I mean, I go back to The Hobbit and the Tralala elves, and I go back to even just earlier but we have no need of company, and hobbits are so dull, and they all laughed. I mean, the elves laugh. Elves laugh a lot, and they are gay and merry and take delight in things. And I think, I mean, obviously they would immediately see the silliness in Sam saying, they'll have Sam Gamgee to reckon with. But the fact that they laugh at it, I don't think they're laughing at him. And I think that's something that has been brought home to me. They are laughing at the concept, but I think they're probably touched by that. And they laugh because joy and delight, right? Yeah, they laughed at how silly his devotion is. I mean, they laugh at his devotion. They laugh because it is merry, it is delightful, his devotion, right? And because, of course, it is silly to have Sam Gamgee to reckon with. Well, yeah, they could have been laughing imagining the situation. Yes, I think so too. Just like when, later on when Mary says, Mary's talking about how long the gates of Buckland could withstand a determined assault from the Black Riders. A quarter second? I mean, like, they would just ride right through. I don't know. Yeah, the hobbits do seem, of course, to underestimate the Black Riders, because how could they know that these are the most powerful creatures they've ever had in the Shire? Yeah, okay, so a lot of you, Jesse, Christy, Rosie, are all saying sort of, it's like how you laugh at a 5-year-old trying to defend someone, or yeah, boy, get those riders, or it's a cute thing, right? And I just don't want to read that as dismissive, right? Or looking down at him. I think they find this endearing and delightful. Okay. The elves, sir. We had some talk last night. Did you have some talk last night? This should have been Frodo's clue. When did you have talk with the elves last night about this, Sam? It can't have been. I mean, they were together until Sam fell asleep. And then Frodo fell asleep. This has to have been after Frodo fell asleep and Sam was still awake, and he dropped the act and then had a conversation with them. If I were Frodo, I might have clued into, wait, when? You talked to them last night? When did you talk to them about this last night? Might have picked up on that. And leading from that, and they seemed to know you were going away, so I didn't see the use of denying it. So I always, just like, sort of like his cheeky, bold, he has some sense. They seem to know you were going away, so I didn't see the use of denying it. Well, you shouldn't have been talking, even if they seemed to know you were going away, you should have just, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, that's not your call to make, Sam, to open up about stuff because they seem to know that he's going away. I was always surprised that he would be so bold as to make that call and to say, well, it seems fine. Until I realized he didn't. He heard Frodo telling Gildor all about that, or Gildor guessing that he was going away, and Frodo confirming it. So once he heard that, he felt free, of course, and as well he should, to confirm it, or at least not deny it. But I always sort of thought, isn't that a little bold of you to even be discussing it or not denying it, making that call on your own? He did it because he heard, right? He did it because he was awake and he knew. Yeah, well, maybe the elves tried to put him to bed and it turned out he wasn't asleep. No, I think the elves knew that he wasn't asleep. And then, yeah, again, elves are. Does anyone have like an e-text, like a downloaded copy that you can sort of Control F for something? I would love to know. This might be hard to find even with an e-text. Is there an occasion when Sam, speaking to Frodo, uses the word elves and doesn't have Sir after it? It seems like it's just not existing. Anyway, they seem a bit above my likes and dislikes, so to speak, answered Sam slowly. It doesn't seem to matter what I think about them. They're quite different from what I expected. So old and young, and so gay and sad, as it were. Frodo looked at Sam, rather startled, half expecting to see some outward sign of the odd change that seemed to have come over him. It did not sound like the voice of the old Sam Gamgee that he thought he knew, but it looked like the old Sam Gamgee sitting there, except that his face was unusually thoughtful. I find this interesting because I think that we already get a fair amount of evidence from earlier chapters that Sam is not, to borrow the Hobbit phrasing, as prosy as we might think. He has a very romanticized view of the world. He's passionate about elves, sir, and sailing, and this kind of poetical sing-song manner that he has, and of course stories about the old days, whatever Ted Sandyman may say. And I think it's interesting that Frodo doesn't see that. I wonder how Sam acts around Frodo, as opposed to how he acts around Ted Sandyman or the other working class hobbits in The Green Dragon, or even around Bilbo. I would have thought that Frodo would have seen Sam acting this way before, listening to old Mr. Bilbo's tales. I find it interesting that he seems different to him, because he doesn't seem different to me. I expect this level of thoughtfulness from Sam. Now, I guess thinking through it, Sam was so excited to see the elves, right? Like, maybe thoughtfulness the morning after meeting them is not what Frodo expected, and I think that could be fair. Okay, we've got people checking the. Well, yes, okay. As I was thinking it through, as Lola says, there are elves used 255 times. It might take some time to check. Yes. Sorry, that's on me. I think that's too big a research project. And apparently he says elves without adding Sir just moments later. Oh well, there goes my theory. Yeah, you're right. Let's keep going. Do you feel the need to leave the Shire now that your wish to see them has come true already? He asked. Yes, sir. I don't know how to say it, but after last night I feel different. I seem to see ahead in a kind of way. I know we are going to take a very long road into darkness, but I know I can't turn back. It isn't to see elves now. See, there it is. It isn't to see elves. At least it should be, it isn't to see elves now, sir. Shoot. I was hoping. Nor dragons nor mountains that I want. I don't rightly know what I want, but I have something to do before the end, and it lies ahead, not in the Shire. I must see it through, sir. Okay, so only like 40 words separate elves and sir there, so I'm going to count it, if you understand me. I don't altogether, but I understand that Gandalf chose me a good companion. I am content. We will go together. What I want to see here, and this is just sort of one of those, like, let's keep it in the back of our mind. Does Sam have a kind of foresight? Is Sam gifted with foresight and foreknowledge in a way? Because I can think of one place a few chapters later where it seems like he does again, more conspicuously than this. But he already seems to know things that he oughtn't, right? I know we are going to take a very long road into darkness. How do you know that? I mean, all you know, Sam, is that you're leaving the Shire and going to Rivendell. Why do you know that that road leads into darkness? Know is an interesting word here, and I think it's used advisedly. I want to keep an eye on that. I have something to do before the end, and it lies ahead, not in the Shire. I must see it through, sir, if you understand me. I think readers of the Silmarillion will recognize the parallel here with Finrod Felagund. And for those of you who haven't read it, I'll be brief. But he also has this kind of foreknowledge. And I think it's more explicit there that sort of I don't know if it's described as a doom comes over him or specifically foreknowledge comes over him in a moment. But it's fairly explicit that he sees ahead. There's something I have to do. I have an oath I have to keep. And I see that echoed here. Sam knows there's something he has to do before the end. And I think that's two good data points in favor of this. And where does he get that foreknowledge? I'm not sure. But I think that we have to keep an eye out for it. Going back to the elves, sir, would it be to Sam being unusually thoughtful, Rosie asks, would it be the first time Frodo is actually acknowledging Sam in a new, more familial way? Like if Sam really has always been a servant, maybe this is a new thing. That's possible. It's possible. Maybe Frodo has never really stopped to think about Sam, or whether he's so prosy as a gardener might be thought to be. Yeah, and Rosie, that's what I was thinking. She says, like, I act differently among my coworkers than I do with my boss. I think that's kind of where I'm at with it. Is I'll bet he's less comfortable showing off his poetic side with Frodo, because Frodo must know a lot more than him, right? He might be afraid of feeling silly. Jesse says maybe he's just perceptive and actually picking up on the elves. Maybe. Do the elves say enough to give him this level of insight? Yeah. And Lola says intuition again. You know what? Maybe that's it. Maybe we're not giving Sam enough credit for intuition. Yeah. Jesse and Christy are saying like reading subtext, reading the room. I don't know if he could get all this from, he certainly don't think he could get, I have something to do before the end, and it lies ahead, not in the Shire, from reading the room or from subtext. Maybe he could get, Long Road into Darkness from Gildor's hints and warnings. I'm not convinced of that. I'll have to think about it. Maybe. But I don't think his, the doom that is laid upon him here. No. Paige says Sam is very fascinated by elves, and then properly adds "Sir" parenthetically, and maybe he was visited by one earlier in his life and affected his perception. Making an enchantment guess here. That would be very consistent with elf lore or elf, fairy stories that Tolkien would be familiar with. And going back to the Green Dragon, Ted Sandyman says, "I'll wager you haven't seen an elf walking through the Shire." And Sam says thoughtfully, "Well, I don't know." And I've always read that to be, well, he thinks he saw an elf, but he doesn't want to say it out loud because he'll get laughed at. Maybe there's something on the edge of his memory. Maybe there's something that, he doesn't quite remember. And that would be consistent with enchantment. So that's an interesting thought. I like that. Yeah. Okay, so maybe this was Aiden clarifies, and maybe this is what some of you guys were talking about. As a keen observer, Sam probably picked up more from Frodo's initial conversation with Gandalf than even Frodo did. I think he has a lot of contextual intuition, but I don't know about foresight yet. Yeah, I don't know about foresight yet either, Aiden, although I'm leaning, which is, Sherlock Holmes is right. You shouldn't, it's dangerous to speculate without data, and we need more data. But contextual intuition feels mundane to me, and I'm resistant to it. But let's put a pin in it. I don't want to go too far. I'd have to go back and look at Gandalf's chat with Frodo to see if there's anything in there that he might have picked up on, and that may be true. Christy says, could be his excuse to come with Frodo too. Like, hey, take me, I have a part to play too. I don't read it that way. And I was about to say I don't read Sam as being that kind of deceptive. But he's done a lot of deceiving lately. So maybe. Oh, Rosie's cat is joining the chat. Awesome. That's funny. Paramilk says, the closest I can think of something he has to do is the fact that he was specifically instructed by the elves, sir, not to not leave Frodo. I keep pushing back. I can't. You guys have very reasonable guesses here, and I'm so married to this Sam has foresight idea, and it's unhealthy, and I'm trying to quit it. So I promise I'm not committing to it. That's perfectly reasonable, but I'm resistant to it because I think something I have to do before the end, and it lies ahead, not in the Shire, is too specific wording to just be, I have to look out for Frodo. Yeah. Yeah, could indicate, Parmilk says, oh, I have a role to play that's bigger than I know. Yes, but I think he's talking about something more specific here, right? Like, I think he would say, I have a role to play, but it's something to do. I have something to do. I have an act. I read that as I have an act I need to perform. Anyway. Okay, that is what I had prepared for tonight. Did anybody else have any questions while I catch up on the chat here and see if there's anything I missed? Anything that jumped out at you from chapters 4 and 5? Aiden asks if Sam is like a stand-in for Tolkien. He was added in later drafts. He drives a lot of the plot. The author would definitely have foresight. Let's look at that. Let's keep that in mind as a question. I don't think of Tolkien's process that way. I think he would hate that idea based on sort of the what I've read of his early drafts. But that doesn't mean that it's entirely untrue. Deborah Smith. Deborah, are you new to the chat? Welcome. Perhaps the elves told him something and told him not to tell. That's possible. I mean, we don't know the extent of his conversation with the elves after Frodo went to sleep. I could readily imagine Gildor saying, "You have a long road ahead. You have a road into darkness. This is going to be a dark road for you." Or maybe even Sam said, something indicating his intuition from the chat with Gandalf, and Gildor confirmed it or affirmed his feeling. And Lola says, I'd say Gandalf already could have given him the idea that bigger things are happening. It could be dark. That's another possibility for sure, is that he may have had a conversation with Gandalf about this. And Gandalf would certainly have told him this is a dark road. That's interesting, Rosie. I always thought of Sam as more of the Watson character. So that's 2 Holmes references tonight. I love that. Who we experience the world journey with instead of a self-insert. I like that. I don't think he's quite a cipher into which we can pour ourselves, Twilight style. But I think there's something to that. I think there's something we can more readily identify with Sam than maybe other characters. Paige asks, do we know how much of a scamp Frodo was in his youth? Farmer Maggot seems to remember him quite well. We've skipped over Farmer Maggot entirely tonight, which is a shame because he's a lot of fun. Farmer Maggot says, I can't remember the exact wording, but young Frodo Baggins was one of the worst or the worst young ruffian in Buckland. And that we have no reason not to take him at his word. Jesse says the elves aren't really known for giving straight up instructions. Yes, go not to the elves for counsel. They will say both yes and no. Yeah, that's a fair point. I'm not sure that Gildor would have said, oh, once Frodo was asleep, oh, okay, listen, Sam, here's what's going down. Yes. Well, makes the connection between Tolkien and Beren. Yes, well, Beren was carved on the professor's tombstone. Beren and Luthien, yeah. And I don't know that in that one, I don't know that Tolkien ever saw himself in Beren in what Beren did so much as Beren in relation to Luthien, right? I think that his love for Edith, his wife, was such that he saw himself as the mortal, unworthy man. Not unworthy, that's not fair, but the marrying up one. And that's touching, I think. Rebecca says, but the elves could hint at the idea that Sam has a greater purpose. I could see hints, definitely. Hints and warnings are the currency that the elves deal in. And it may have been, don't you leave him. You have something to do before the end. I just feel like Sam wouldn't put those words into his own mouth. But I like the idea more that he would have said that to Gildor. I feel I have something to do before the end. And that Gildor then would have said, that's a good feeling. Yeah, well, I had never even thought about that connection. Baron and Luthien's love story, and Edith and Ron's love story. I can't even say Ron, the professor. Edith was older, yes, than the professor, as was Luthien, older than Baron. The age gap, of course, between Luthien and Baron being slightly larger, but I take your meaning. Yes. That's fun. Okay, let's wrap it there for tonight. Thank you, everyone. That was really fun. We have, I can't remember who was saying, was it Jesse saying that you wait until Thursday to read the next chapters? I've been doing that as well, but it really does make for a crunch. I usually read most of Saturday and make notes. But we are getting into, next week, we are getting into the Old Forest and then into the House of Tom Bombadil, right? I think that's right. Those are the next two chapters. Conspiracy Unmasked, chapters 6 and 7 are those two. Yes. I don't think those are too long. No, they're not. Good. And then we're into the Barrow Downs. And then, we're 2 weeks away from Bree. We're flying through this. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. We'll talk to you on Discord soon.